Snapchat definitely far and away, stole the show. They were the major sponsor this year, selling spectacles, which I did pick up a dev kit, which I have here. And I've been honestly very impressed with them. Meta had perhaps the saddest display of any of them, any of the people there, period. It was a folding table with a black tablecloth and a 8x11 paper that said Meta in the middle.
All right, welcome back to the Worlds Beyond podcast. My name is Don Kianian.
And I'm Benjamin Wiener.
And this time we are doing the core duo for this podcast, the Ben and Don Power Hour, if you want to call it. We're going to take a look back at some of our episodes that we've done so far this season, some of the things that we've noticed in the industry, some of the things we've talked about, and then also take a look forward at what you guys might expect coming out of the rest of this season, and hopefully get you guys excited about some of the guests and topics that we're going to be talking about in the coming episodes. Before we get started, we've been continuing to get some great comments and feedback on some of our videos. Keep going and leaving those comments. If you have questions that you want us to address on these episodes, leaving a comment on our YouTube videos is a great way to get in touch with us. But I think since our last episode, Ben, you've been kind of on the road a little bit, right? So you, I think, were recently at the AWE conference. Is that right?
That's right. Augmented World Expo in Long Beach, although they have a few international events as well. Yeah, it's nice. I mean, it's a bit different from GDC. GDC is very general and sort of focuses on, gaming across platforms, whereas AWE is very XR focused, both on, hardware and software, but it's a much tighter knit community. So last year was my first year really doing the circuits, and I went to a lot of the talks, and I was sort of going from event to event, and I didn't really know anybody. But, now that I've been a lot more involved with the wider XR community over the past year, this year was a very different vibe. I think it was a little smaller than last year, but the people who were there, I spent a lot more time catching up and meeting with people that I knew. I did get to see a few really interesting talks, but the sort of the big takeaway, Snapchat definitely far and away, stole the show. Everything was covered in Snapchat logos. The escalators had giant stickers on them. So it was just everything was Snapchat. They were the major sponsor this year. They're, of course, selling spectacles, which I did pick up a dev kit, which I have here. And I've been honestly very impressed with them for what they are. I mean, they're certainly a prototype, but I've tried them indoors. I've tried them outdoors, explored the apps that they have. I've played around a little bit in Lens Studio. And as for a tool for development, I'm really excited to sort of dive in and explore those further. On the other end of the spectrum, Meta had perhaps the saddest display of any of them, any of the people there, period. It was a folding table with a black tablecloth and a 8x11 paper that said Meta in the middle. And there was one guy with a pair of Ray-Bans, and he was great to chat with. He did a great job with what he had been given, but at the end of the day, it was a single pair of Ray-Bans when compared to when you look at, say, Meta's GDC booth, where they went all out, and it felt like you were inside of another space, right? Or even last year, Meta really showed up with the Ray-Ban display at AWE. So that was interesting, and I think it really is an indicator that Meta's moving away from VR, MR. Mm-hmm. We know this with Horizon Worlds. They're flipping to a mobile first environment. And it's a little sad. Part of why I'm so excited to explore the spectacles and Lens Studio is because what drew me to this industry was the magic of spatial interactions. Yeah, so I'm definitely interested in talking a little bit more about, my takeaways from exploring, the existing apps or lenses, I should say, on the spectacles. But As far as Meta Horizon goes, I mean, I think that Meta is sending a clear indicator. Like it was almost worse that they had the table than not having one at all, right?
Right. And then you also compound that with the news that we heard recently that, Sam Altman is alleging that Meta is offering these ridiculous signing bonuses to AI engineers to defect from OpenAI and go over to Meta, right? Like, if we're to take those claims at face value, I can see a $100 million cut in the event marketing budget going towards these hiring practices, right? But yeah, it is interesting that even as recent as 5-6 years ago, Meta was all in on the immersive reality, mixed reality experiences, and now, like you're saying, it's almost kind of fallen to the wayside, right? Based on what you're seeing, at least at the prototype of these Snap spectacles, and they're showing here at AWE, do you feel like Snap is poised to kind of like pick up the slack that Meta is kind of leaving on the table, or do you think there's still some room there?
Well, I don't know that Meta is leaving AR off the table. I think that the hardware is probably a year or two out. Snap is definitely first to market. I think their design philosophy is a little different, whereas other companies are really focusing on FOV, which of course is hugely important, right? You don't want to feel like you're looking through little boxes, on your glasses. And I'll say like the FOV is the worst part of the Snap spectacles, right? That being said, brightness, both indoors and outdoors. I mean, I took these out. There is a dog walking app that it like drops little bones in your path. And like if you're at a traffic stop, it'll like throw dog facts at you. Like, did you know that dogs went through their paws? We're walking the dog and it was just like, it was very easy to adjust the settings on my phone from the Spectacles app. I just turned up the brightness. I got about 40 to 45 minutes of time, which was, we stopped for ice cream, so it actually ran out before we got back. Hopefully it logged my points. We'll see. Right. But, I think that battery power is going to be a limiting factor. And I think that that's really important. But I really think that Snap is correct in their approach that it needs to work everywhere, right? No matter how good your FOV is, if you can't wear them outside, right, what's the point?
Right.
It becomes an activity you do while you're indoors rather than integrated into your lifestyle. The Apple Watch or smartwatches in general, right? The first time I tried one, I think I had a Samsung Gear. I just like didn't put a lot of thought into it. And it was like just like constantly going off and it drove me insane. I was getting crazy notification fatigue from it. Yeah. When I last upgraded my phone, they gave me a deal on the watch and I was like, all right, I'll give it another shot. And this time I really went in and adjusted my settings. And I'm finding that because I'm seeing like key notifications from like work email or texts on my watch and all the other notifications are silenced for the most part, I'm able to identify if they're actually important or not. It's getting me to the point where I'm spending less time on my phone than I did before, right? I'm averaging under 2 hours daily now, which feels really good. I spend so much time on screens during the day. Right. It kind of sucks to look at your things and be like, I spent 4 hours looking at my phone today, right? That's terrible. Right. And part of what my takeaway from playing a lot of these, playing with a lot of these lenses, they had some like really cool, very simple games. I think the limit for spectacles is like 25 megabytes. I'll have to fact check that, but the apps are quite small. They have some really cool AI interactions. There's like a chef helper that can like look at what ingredients you have, give you a recipe, and then gives you those instructions in your space, while you're cooking, which is good. Although I'm a little worried about steam. Getting too close to the glasses, so I've been too afraid to try it. But like, there's a few different types of UI interactions where they're spatially locked, or they're locked to your head, or they're locked to the lenses. So you can either have a UI that is like always in your view when you look around, but more importantly, you can have a UI that's sort of up off to the side, and you glance up and it's there, and you look away. So having something like that, like just sort of like a quick bar that has like like you do on your start menu, right? You have the time, date, weather, and your Bitcoin ticker, right?
Right.
Only the essentials. Only the essentials. Yeah. But imagine just like having that and you're wearing glasses normally, and when you need that information, you can like look up and it's there. And if you need to like expand on it, you give a little pinch and it's like, oh, here's an expanded weather report. But it's something that is, augmenting your reality, but it's not replacing it.
It's interesting because the recent Apple announcement event, like I think they announced like a big part of their like UI design updates where it's like everything's kind of like semi-transparent. You can see through the things you need, right? Everyone's kind of thinking this is them gearing up for an augmented reality, extended reality sort of play. With Snap, they started with the Snap Glasses, which is like capture the world around you and share it to the world on Snapchat. Now it's like, okay, now you're interacting with the world around you and getting these data feeds overlaid however it makes sense, right? And all of the stuff we've seen from Meta and other players in this space also kind of reinforce this, right? Like the shift to AR and extended reality is where a lot of these companies are kind of focusing, it seems like. Maybe the reason why AI is taking such a big focus for a lot of these companies is to integrate those AI tools into these augmented reality systems to get even more value out of these overlays, perhaps, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And the Apple liquid glass thing. I've been watching the war, the naysayers and the yaysayers on LinkedIn, and it just seems to me, and this is something that is really something that I think about a lot because we do a lot of cross-platform and not just it's not like Xbox and PlayStation, which are like fundamentally both consoles. It's VR and mobile devices, which are so fundamentally different. And so I look at that and I'm like, whether or not you think it looks good or if I'm not a UI designer, so maybe this is way off base, but it's like, and I get Apple likes everything to be the same throughout their ecosystem, but they're two different platforms, right? And if there are challenges on mobile that cause liquid glass to like not feel good as UI because it's causing like too much visual noise, why did you release it on a platform that it doesn't make sense for? Because it makes total sense for VR or AR, right? And it makes total sense for their Vision Pro. And I would love, I don't have a Vision Pro, but I imagine that liquid glass looks great on it. And that's the sort of environments that it's designed for. And I don't think that people are wrong when they say like liquid glass, like they're going to make an AR play, like, they're going after that. Like, okay, like, sure. But why did you just throw it on a device that didn't meet this change? And again, like maybe like I'm not a UI designer. Maybe I'm crazy for thinking that, but we'll see. I think it looks cool. But
it is. Yeah. And it is interesting because like there were rumblings about Apple AR headsets back, in the early days of VR and AR, right? Whether there was any truth to those rumors at that time or not, right? It seems like Apple is almost inverting the development strategy that like Meta did, right? Where, they're starting from mobile and building to like the headsets almost versus Meta's like started with some headsets and are now scaling back to mobile.
I'm convinced that when they made the Vision Pro, what they really wanted to make were really advanced AR glasses. And they just like, as they were developing, they realized well, we need bulkier hardware for this. And it evolved again, total speculation. Maybe this is just a wild guess, but I have a strong feeling based on the marketing that they did, that they intended these to be used like AR glasses. But at the end of the day, it's just like the hardware isn't quite there yet. I think we're really close. The Spectacles, as bulky and unattractive as the form factor is on them, right? Like it's a prototype. It's a developer kit, right? And I can tell that it is close, to where it needs to be. I mean,
just look at where like the Oculus One dev kit was to where the Quests and Rift headsets are now, right? It's like night and day difference almost.
Not almost, it is. You're right.
But this will be an interesting kind of timestamp moment to look back on, at the end of this season and see how much further did Apple make it towards the AR play, or like is this liquid glass painful user experience or a delightful user experience for new iOS users. Who knows, right? Yeah. So it'll be fun to like check back in on this later down the line and see how things have progressed.
Well, liquid glass notwithstanding, Apple is so opaque, for the most part. So we'll see. We'll have to see what they announce next. Probably have said so by the time we said something by the time we released this episode.
Looking back at some of the things we have said in the past, right? When we had Scott, aka Ubi, on for the episode he was on, we did have like this kind of extended conversation about how AI tools can get involved potentially in the development of these VR, AR experiences and making, developers' lives easier or improving the user experience for people who are interfacing on these types of experiences, right? One of the things he suggested or he posited was like this, like AI goo, he called it, right? That is like floating around you as you're developing experiences. It like kind of can read into what you're, trying to build and build things in a similar design ethos or style or
context,
idea around it. Yeah, exactly. And since that episode, we had some of these kind of AI tools coming out. I think specifically on the Meta platform, you had built Suitcase Scramble using kind of a similar sort of AI tool, right? Have things changed since then? Do you feel like we're moving closer to that reality Scott was, illustrating, or what's your take on that?
Well, I mean, there's a couple elements of that like just don't really exist yet or are very nascent. And the first one is that AI is reactionary to input right now. It is not anticipating. There's no like AI agent that is just like watching me build and then saying like, looks like you're building a platformer or need a double jump mechanic or like, like this is like something that people commonly do. Here's whatever. Like that's not really happening. And the other thing is contextual generation. So it's like right now, if I give a prompt, I need to be very specific with my sort of like style guide that I give it and then ask for the thing. And I have to do that every single time or else I'm going to get it doesn't look at my experience and say, oh, looks like you're doing, this in the style of Into the Spider-Verse or whatever. Right. Like, here's some stuff in that style. Do I think that that's going to change? Probably. Do I think that having AI that like anticipates is going to be a thing? I wouldn't be surprised if that already existed in some form, but it's not being used in Meta Horizon Worlds, right? I think that it's probably easier to get it to basically give it a style guide and say like, hey, look at the world and like use that as inspiration or like, hey, here's an image of sort of like the mood that I want for this. Use that as context for mesh generations. I think that's probably closer. Who knows if and when that'll come. But as far as like the AI as a technology goes, I'm by no means an expert. But when you look at like VR, when the DK1 was announced, which was over a decade ago, right? Yeah. Closing on 15 years. Like think about like how quickly that progressed, right? Then look at like blockchain, which was, and sort of like how quickly that progressed. Then look at AI and how quickly that's progressing. Yeah. AI is just moving really, really fast. And that we're getting these like really big jumps in technology sort of in shorter and shorter intervals. So who knows? Like, do we have AI goo floating around us that can anticipate and understand context and is a collaborator, like a collaborative entity? Not yet. Is that going to happen? Maybe in 5 years, maybe in 6 months. I'm not as tapped into that industry as some of my colleagues, but it's interesting to think about. And as far as Suitcase Scramble goes, I was just focusing on art for that. I wasn't doing any vibe coding or anything like that. So I just, the art side of it only took like 2.5 hours, at most. Got everything in there that I needed. But again, very small game.
Another thing that we talked about a little bit, I think this was on our episode with Emorgul, or it might have been our episode with Arturo. I can't remember. We kind of did a comparison and contrast of, standalone single player type experiences versus more, multiplayer friendly type experiences. Since then, we also had this announcement of the Deadpool VR game that's coming. And that is, by all indications, a standalone, I think, single player story based experience. This will probably be a pretty huge VR game, I would imagine. Is there anything that you've seen either in like the gameplay reveals or trailers of this game, or even in like the lead up to the launch of it, that gives you any ideas for games or experiences you're working on right now or in the future?
Our studio just isn't big enough to make that kind of game, right?
Sure,
it's not our specialty. It's not necessarily even the type of game that I'm particularly like interested in. Mm-hmm. That's easy for me to say when, like I said, we can't do it. So, we just don't have the resources to do something like that. If someone showed up tomorrow and was like, here's, $2.5 million, go make this, I'd be like, you got it. Look at the success of like the Batman game that came out versus the success of like the Assassin's Creed game, which, I think both were quite well received. I think that the Assassin's Creed game probably didn't do quite as well. Batman was also like a release title, like with the Quest 3S, you just got it. So I'm wondering how much those statistics were adjusted by those sales. But, I was at this interesting talk with, I believe it was JP Menudos, gave a talk at AWE, and he was talking about the market, and about 50% of VR, Quest ecosystem users are still on Quest 2s. Mm-hmm. And a lot of these, the Quest 3 is just so much more powerful. These experiences are going to be a lot better. And moreover, MR experiences are essentially exclusive. What Meta is really pushing is free to play live service games. That's what they want to push on the store. Games on the store are also competing with Horizon Worlds, as we've mentioned, which are all free to play. The age range, right, are not individuals that have a huge amount of disposable income, right? They're all teens and young adults, that TIA audience. So it's like, do I think a Deadpool game will do well? I mean, a Batman game did pretty well. I think Deadpool has a shot at doing really well. These narrative experiences, they'll do well or they won't, but VR isn't really like a great medium for them in the way that, like, it's hard to have really long narrative stories when the friction to putting on a headset is so high. And people have and people who aren't super accustomed to VR already, like they can get sick, and stuff like that. And so, I mean, I think that those sorts of games on VR, quite frankly, are going to live or die on their IP. And Deadpool is a really strong IP. Batman's a really strong IP. Assassin's Creed was a pretty strong IP. But I mean, like, they also released a Vampire the Masquerade game. As someone who was a fan of that IP, I picked it up and I played it, and I was just like, man, I can't do hours and hours of this. And maybe that's more on me. But like when I'm going into VR, I'm looking for experiences that are like 20 to 40 minutes in length generally. If I'm really into something, maybe I'll play it for an hour or two. But, back in COVID, when I was spending all of my free time in VR, right, because there was nothing else to do, that's really when you saw this sort of like more mature audience that really prefers those types of games. For sure. Engaging with the medium. Whereas now, all the 30-somethings are out playing pickleball. Instead of on their VR headsets, or if they are playing their VR headsets, it's to play virtual pickleball, right? But it's not like this younger generation really focuses on this like fast media. UGC is so popular now. We look at Roblox,
right?
That's
what I was gonna say. It feels like these younger audiences, or even like just the more avid users of these platforms, are almost looking to these experiences as more of a platform for creating content and less of a platform for doing the game itself. I forget what the exact number is, but like they've done surveys asking kids, what they want to be when they grow up. And whereas in the past years, it was like, I want to be an astronaut, or I want to be, a fireman or whatever, right? More and more people are saying, I want to be a Twitch streamer. I want to be a content creator. I want to be a YouTuber, right? Like that kind of thing. And so having these open platforms like Horizon, Roblox, VR chat, so they can make their own mark, I think is where they're gravitating towards precisely for that reason. And like you said, Deadpool will live or die on the strength of its IP, most likely, because these kids probably won't be able to do that kind of like building their own content. And it's a more mature property. So you might even get, more parental controls in the mix that keep these kids from even getting access. That's not stopped kids before, right? But like it's something else to maybe consider as you're thinking about putting more mature type content out on these platforms, is that the kids who are using these platforms so avidly are maybe not going to be able to even access your content.
Well, it's so interesting, and this is maybe way outside of the scope of our podcast, to be honest, but it's interesting to think about, you listed things like people wanted to be, astronaut, fire chief, police officer, judge. A lot of those things feel like status driven, right? Whereas things like YouTuber, Twitch streamer, influencer, it's a lot more focused on fame and like wealth. It's seen as like an easy path to wealth, or an easier path to wealth. As much as that is absolutely not true,
right?
Don't go out and do that, right? Don't support yourself, do it as a hobby, and hopefully it builds into something. Unless you've got a really long runway, but like there's like such a cultural shift. People just also wanted to be like rock stars and celebrities, and fashion models too. Like that's always been around to some degree. But you're right that I think if you ask most kids, there's a significantly higher rate of this sort of influencer, content creator role. It's interesting to think about. I think there's a big rise in like there are less people like playing games, but like watching more game playthroughs, like let's plays and stuff like that.
Absolutely. I mean, like I can tell just from my personal experience, I never used to be one who, cared about like, playthrough type content or like reaction type content or anything like that. And it's like the bulk of what I watch on YouTube now, because, I'm not going into these games anymore myself, because my Quest 2 headset has been sitting in my garage gathering dust for God knows how long. And I don't want to go out and buy a Quest 3 or anything like that. Right. And so, watching these playthroughs and getting to kind of live vicariously through them has become my, new mode of passive entertainment whenever I'm like working on editing a video or whatever. Right. It definitely has become a pathway for people to make a living or make a name for themselves. It's just going to be really tough to stand out as that field becomes more saturated with creators.
Well, that speaks a lot to the change in a lot of content creation now. And this is going to be a really good segue into, our next topic. But these sort of like semi-focused activities, right? I think there was that rumor that came out of Netflix that they were like telling writers to write the characters saying what they're doing, so that people who are like cooking or scrolling during the show, right, only have to be half engaged. And that was part of the design philosophy for a game that we're coming out with a couple weeks from now from recording, I think is our official launch. We're releasing on Horizon Worlds Bots, which is an idol battler where you can customize your own robot. If you're familiar with like the battle bot competitions and stuff, like it's a similar concept, but it's an idol battler. So the bots all maneuver, they fire their weapons on their own. You've got a few active abilities you can activate yourself. But a lot of the fun of it, I think, is customizing your bot, trying out different customizations, see what works, see what doesn't. And then as new content comes out, those different combinations will become even more plentiful. But a big part of the design philosophy for that game was be like, okay, we're designing a mobile game. What's important about mobile games? And I'm going and I'm like, as I'm doing research, right, I'm playing all these mobile games and I'm watching Netflix while I'm doing it. And I'm like, oh, wait a second, like maybe, I think that there is this level where it's like people like to multitask. They want to be engaged by as many screens as possible at the same time, for better or worse. Right. And so the concept behind that game is like, hey, like, let's make a game where you can be really focused on it and you can be like fully engaged with it if you want to be, but it should be a game that you can also play while you're watching Netflix or you're riding on the bus, or you're in the back of your Waymo. Something that you could just like pick up and play, but it's not something that you have to be 100%, mentally engaged with. So that's going to be releasing in early July. And we're actually, we've been working on quite a few projects. We're working on 4 projects, and by the time this episode releases, 3 of them will be out. Bots being one of them. We actually have already released Yeet Yourself, which we demoed at AWE, which we built that in collaboration with Emorgul and Sawhorse. So awesome. We were supporting that build, and that has released. We've already had thousands of players yeet themselves. Highly recommend going and playing that. We've also been working with New Canvas, releasing a game called Pop and Drop, and that releases tomorrow as of recording. So we'll be able to chat more about that on our next episode when we have Nathan and Wadua from New Canvas on to chat about what it's like coming on. They really specialize in immersive experiences. And so this is their first Horizon World project, and I'm really interested to hear their perspective on what it was like coming onto the platform and learning it and understanding, limitations and what it's good at and all that. Really, really fun. It's a social game. Each player has 3 balloons attached to their chair, and you spin a wheel, and you can either target other players, or you can steal a balloon, or you can get power-ups. It's very cool, very fun.
Awesome. And all 3 of these games you said are going to be on Horizon Worlds?
Horizon Worlds.
And like you mentioned, we'll have Nathan and Wadua on from New Canvas on the next episode to talk more about this game. But working with these studios on building these experiences, was there any kind of learnings or anything that you unveiled as you were working on these that you're going to be taking forward into future experiences that you build with other studios? Like anything that kind of was like a light bulb moment? Well,
I mean, the good news is that Meta released a lot of features that the platform was really missing. We're going to see avatar animations. We're seeing we have more control over avatar poses for sitting and stuff like that. Much more robust mobile features. Unfortunately, we didn't get a lot of these until towards the end of production. So these are things that are going to roll out for the most part in the next batch of games in the second half of the year. I think we're going to see a lot more of this. And in 2026, we'll see even better mobile experiences coming out of Horizon Worlds. I mean, the fact of the matter is that they are moving so quickly on getting these features out and really improving the mobile development experience. It was still built as a VR first platform initially. So that sort of transition is still happening. That takes time. And thankfully, we now have a lot of those tools. We have a lot more control, like the size of your screens. We can dynamically size menus or cameras, right? So that's really exciting, and I'm really excited for the next the next generation of mobile experiences on Horizon Worlds. That being said, nothing that we're building now, it's not that they're the worst for it. It's just that we designed around it. We designed games that didn't rely on those tools. So they're still really fun. They're still really accessible. They're still very, very mobile friendly. I think that we'll see even more functionality coming in the future and more stability and all that good stuff.
Yeah, we'll make sure to include links to all 3 of those experiences in the description for this podcast episode, so anyone with a mobile phone or a headset can check them out and give them a try. Yeah.
Well, I will say the Yeet Yourself and Pop and Drop, those will be cross-platform. Bots on release will be mobile only.
Okay.
We're trying something different. We wanted to really focus our efforts in making that mobile experience feel really, really solid. Mm-hmm. We may come by and do a VR pass in the future for a day 2 release, but on release, it will be a mobile only experience.
Since our first episode with Jelitza, Plants and Bugs have kind of had a series of, updates here and there, right? Are those still going strong? You're getting some good traction on those worlds? Any future additions or components you're looking to build for any of those?
Plants is what I would consider to be feature complete. We sort of stopped development on that probably 6 or 8 months ago. All of the plants that are going to be in the game are released. That being said, I think that there is very much a future in which we see a Plants 2 that is more focused on a mobile experience that's more akin to the original Farmville experience, right? Where there are plants you can grow in a single session, and then there are plants that grow while you're offline. I know that the Roblox gardening game, Grow Your Garden, is doing ridiculously well, and it just took that simple your plants grow while you're offline concept which is, not what I would call revolutionary, but like they're also now the most played game in the world ever. So, that's a design consideration that we made when we made Plants. But like due to the nature of the VR, we were like, this isn't a game people are going to keep coming back to. They're going to come on, they're going to play for an hour, and then maybe a week later they'll come back again. So we didn't do that design. Now I'm kicking myself. I was like, man, I could have made Grow Your Garden 2 years ago. That's the sort of thing where we would take that and update it. Bugs is an interesting case where, again, like both of these pieces, I think I've said in the past, were built as portfolio pieces. And we wound up sort of rushing the development of Bugs towards the end to be submitted for the contest, which, thankfully it was worth it. We won third place, which like isn't bad, right?
Right.
Is the game like generating money? like we have a pretty like niche, we have a pretty niche brand, and it's not really the focus of our company, but we probably broke even on it or we're close to it, and it certainly has bolstered our reputation and our relationships with Meta and other studios. Mm-hmm. Do I think that we'll update it? Gosh, I really wish that we could spend the effort to like do another couple months on that game. Honestly, the good news is that we have a pretty packed schedule. We've sort of established ourselves in Horizon Worlds. What's next, and what do we want to do next, and what is going to grow the company, and how can we 5x where we've gotten now?
Sure. And
I really think that the future of that is AR. Back to where we started the conversation. In that talk JP Menudos gave at AWE, it was really interesting. He's like, MR is really cool, but only 50% of people with headsets are using Quest 2s. And so you're cutting those people out of the market. We're sort of past that sort of experimental phase for mixed reality. And it suffers from the same problems that VR has, in that like, you have to make sure your headset's attached. You have to decide to put it on. Like, is the pass-through really good enough? It's pretty good on a Quest 3. I've really enjoyed the MR experiences. The Lego Brick Tales is actually like quite fun. I have been like on my list of games to play. I really want to play Civ 7 on there. Mm-hmm. Got some really cool tech demos, but a lot of the experiences, the MR experiences, that's what they feel like, is tech demos. And it's not that isn't also true for AR, right? But AR is just beginning.
Right.
So I think there's an opportunity right now to sort of be the like beer mug app of of spectacles, right? Similar to what we saw in 2006 with the iPhone, where we can get a lot of these sort of like tech demo-y type experiences, but still have them like be really popular, get a lot of attention. I think now is the right time to strike for that, and I think that's where, when we do have free time away from our project work, that's sort of where I want me and my team to be heading. It's why I invested in the developer kit, and I'm investing the time to learn it and explore the technology.
I couldn't agree more. I know we tend to talk a lot about the individual consumer perspective side of mixed reality experiences, right? For me personally, I've been in the B2B media world for a handful of years now, right? And I kind of got my feet wet with mixed reality content and experiences at a company that I was at 7-8 years ago now. Mm-hmm. It's just a flat video platform. It doesn't do VR, AR in the way that we think about it now, right? But one of its selling points was that it supported 360-degree video for on-demand content, but also on live video streams as well. And so one of the things that we worked on doing while we were there was this webinar that mixed and matched virtual reality, augmented reality, and mixed reality type of experiences all together. And it was kind of jerry-rigged. It wasn't the best experience by any means, right? It was a couple of 360-degree videos shot from 360-degree cameras placed in the studio. And then we switched to what we called a 360 canvas, which was just, if you're looking forward through your goggles or your headset or your mobile phone or whatever, you see the flat, 16:9 video. But then overlaid around it in the surrounding 360 space, you got your slides, you have extra data points. Maybe you have like a poll that you're running for your audience members, that kind of thing, right? Mm-hmm. And it was this like proof point for what you could use mixed reality experiences for in a business setting. And it made a lot of sense to us because we were making it, right? Because it's like, okay, you're in a webinar, you want to have all this data at your fingertips based on how you want to consume it, not unilaterally, however the producer is just spewing the content at you. It didn't take off really that much, but now, we're seeing a lot more 360-degree video content and mixed reality experiences and things like that. I wonder if more, businesses might be able to take advantage of this to create standout content that other businesses aren't making. And maybe there's a market for it, maybe there isn't. It'll be interesting to see if this type of format starts taking hold in the business world as well as kind of like the consumer side of things too.
I'm going to say that I'm a little skeptical. And it's not because it isn't cool technology, but because there's a lot of cool technology that does a lot of cool things that aren't practical. And the reason that I say this is because right now, like when you think about like the movies, right? Like you go to the movies or you go to a planetarium, for example, right? There is a like sitting area and you have a single viewpoint. You're either like leaned back, you're looking up, or you're in the theater. You have a single viewpoint and you're able to control the perspective and understanding of the user and control their focus. Whereas in a 3D space where people can move around, and this is something I'm working on 2P projects that use video screens, that was a challenge we had to sort of deal with, is that people aren't just sitting stationary. They're running around as the content's happening. They're trying to like break the experience. They're trying to get around the edges. When your audience isn't limited to a stationary position, it's like, okay, how are we drawing their focus? How are we making sure they aren't missing what's important? And particularly, again, like with something where you don't have, like humans don't have 360 degrees of view. So if there's something happening behind me that's important, if I haven't been drawn over to that, then I'm just going to miss it.
Right.
So I think that there's definitely a market for in the like artistic expression, right? Or there's a market for like, if I'm like exploring the depths of the ocean, if I can just drop a 3D camera down and then explore that 3D space later, like that seems cool, right? That seems maybe valuable and interesting, so you can go back and re-examine footage. That seems really helpful. I think for like art, like you want to create an exploratory experience where users are discovering what you're making. And so it's not quite as important to do the focus. But if I'm getting a presentation and I'm like, this data, it links to this data, and I then have to add a visual effect of a little star that like streams around that like causes me to like turn around in my space. It's like, okay, well, I could have done that on a 2D screen with a camera pan. Right.
Sure. Right. And that's exactly the kind of thing that I was doing for this webinar. Right. I added little like trails that went off of the flat video. It's just like, hey, by the way, there's like a slide happening over here. Maybe you want to take a look at it, kind of thing.
Exactly. So it's not that there aren't use cases for that. It's that I think that like the use cases are narrow for that sort of experience. Like I just think that like if you're trying to tell a story, you want your viewers to pay attention to the story, not being like, oh, is that like a rabbit that just like popped away over there, or not get distracted, unless it's meant to be experienced multiple times, like a video game, right? And you're meant to sort of like push the boundaries of the space and explore, but at that point, you're basically making a video game, right?
It would be really interesting because like now that they're making these like expanded IMAX theaters with like even huger, wider screens, right? And you also have these like D-box seats where they move around with you and all that kind of thing, right? It would be really interesting to see like a feature film shot in like 360 degrees that tries to take advantage of the expanded IMAX format and uses creative camera panning and uses that like expanded FOV almost. It would be probably nauseating, but really interesting to see someone try it.
Yeah, I remember, what was it? It was some action movie. It was something Henry, I think.
Oh, the like first person one, right?
Right. It was all shot in first person.
Yeah.
It was like an action movie, and it was just like, it was just nauseating to watch, but it was a really interesting application. I think you could watch in VR, but it was just like, again, it was not a comfortable experience.
No.
Yeah, hardcore Henry.
That's what it was.
That was it. Yeah.
And I know, in the past we've ended these podcasts with like, tips and tricks for creators or, anything to tease for upcoming episodes. I think we've kind of touched on some of those a little bit. So instead for this episode, I want to, ask you like, what is like one of your favorite moments from the past episodes of the podcasts that we've done that kind of sticks in your mind?
I mean, I really loved hearing Arturo regale us with his Gorilla Tag experiences. That was fun. Mm-hmm. This is probably one of the most fun parts of the job, is to just chat about it. And I think, everyone we've talked with has just been really incredible and has their own unique perspectives on everything. As someone who specializes in game design, like Eugene is someone who's particularly interesting to chat with for me, just because that's sort of like my area. Mm-hmm. But I think that there's a lot to learn from everyone we talked with, and being able to explore this technology and like do it for a living is just really awesome and fun. And I just am like so glad to be a part of the community and get to have that opportunity to have these conversations, and not just on camera, but also when we go out to these conferences, or I can just like give someone a ring and be like, hey, what do you think about such and such, and then half my day is gone and I'm behind on work suddenly, but. Yeah. Worth it, I think.
Yeah. It's all productive, right? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, I would agree. I think, each of the episodes that we filmed has had, a favorite moment of mine in some way, shape, or form. Between talking with Arturo and Eugene and hearing about their experiences building these really popular games with these, entrenched communities of passionate players and fans. It's a perspective you don't get to have a lot of times. You don't really often get to talk with the creators of these communities and these experiences and understand, their thought process behind it. So that was something I thought was really, really interesting and valuable and fun for that fact, like going on like the debate with Eugene about, where it's appropriate to use AI and where it's not appropriate to use AI. And then, talking with Arturo about, the learnings they took out of Synth Riders and what went into making Final Fury that was different. That was all really interesting for me personally. And then talking with Jelitza, right? Like graphic design and user experience design has always been kind of out of reach for me. And so I'm always fascinated to talk about it with someone who really knows their stuff.
Yeah.
And Jelitza is, super talented. I've been following her personal on my personal Instagram. I've been following her work now, and I'm just constantly loving all of the stuff she's putting out. It's awesome. Mm-hmm. Talking with Scott, he and I go way back, so it's always fun to poke and prod him a little bit. But, hearing his takes on the general state of the industry. And, since we've talked with him, he sent us a couple funny videos of him chucking his headsets and whatnot, right? So it's always fun talking with him too. Yeah.
All in all, like I think it's been like just a really valuable experience to take the time to like sit down and talk about the industry and just talk about Horizon Worlds and where that's going. And it's a really good opportunity to order my thoughts on it. And so it's been really helpful just from that perspective alone. Hopefully others can, find use in that and get some value out of these conversations and spread the love, that XR love.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And, again, thanks to everyone who's been tuning in, listening, watching, commenting, liking these videos and these podcast episodes. We're trying to create our own little community here, and each one of you guys are a part of it. So thank you guys for tuning in and sticking with us. Like we said earlier, if you have any questions, comments, things you want us to talk about, feel free to, send it over to us. Drop us a video, send us an email to worldsbeyondpod@gmail.com, or reach out to us on our social media. We've got Instagram, TikTok. Leave us a comment. Subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts and YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts and your Worlds Beyond. And we're going to be having all kinds of great creators on the Horizon Worlds platform coming on. We already mentioned New Canvas, but we've got a whole bunch of episodes left this season. So definitely subscribe and stay tuned for more of these to come. And we hope to have you on for future episodes. Thanks for listening.
Cheers.